September 3, 1939, His Majesty's Stationery Office, London. Printing supervisor Arthur Clemens held the first propaganda leaflet Britain would drop on Germany. 13 million copies ordered for immediate printing. Every military expert said leaflets were worthless. Every previous war proved they failed. In 6 years, these pieces of paper would convince 2.8 million German soldiers to surrender without firing a shot. The British government's problem was simple. How do you defeat an enemy whose propaganda minister controlled every newspaper, every radio station, every word Germans heard about the war? Joseph Goebbels had spent 6 years constructing the most sophisticated propaganda apparatus in human history. He banned foreign radio broadcasts under penalty of death. He censored every publication. He executed anyone caught reading enemy materials. British intelligence knew that German civilians and soldiers consumed nothing but Nazi-controlled information from 1933 onward. General Paul von Hindenburg had admitted after World War I that Allied leaflets made many thousands consume the poison. But that was 1918, when Germany still had free press and independent thought. In 1939, the Wehrmacht was disciplined, fanatical, convinced of inevitable victory. Traditional British propaganda appealed to anti-Nazi sentiment among Germans, but intelligence assessments concluded no such sentiment existed in measurable quantities. The challenge seemed insurmountable. Penetrate an information monopoly, demoralize the most effective fighting force in Europe, and convince soldiers to betray the Führer they worshipped. Failure meant allowing Nazi Germany to consolidate its conquests indefinitely. September 1939 marked the beginning of what would become the largest psychological warfare campaign in history. The Royal Air Force modified bombers to carry leaflets instead of bombs. Crews called it nickel missions. Bomber crews called the leaflets Bumpf. Squadron Commander John Slessor wrote in his diary that pilots complained about wasting fuel and risking flak to deliver confetti. The first leaflets dropped on Germany were printed appeals to reason, dignity, morality, everything British officials thought might awaken German conscience. They explained that Hitler had forced war upon Britain. They quoted Hitler's broken promises about territorial ambitions. They predicted Germany would face catastrophe greater than World War I. 13 million copies fluttered down over German cities in the first month of war. German authorities ordered civilians to turn in every leaflet to police immediately. The penalty for keeping one, imprisonment in concentration camps or execution. Despite this, British intelligence knew Germans were reading them, because the Nazi Party began printing responses, calling the leaflets paper grenades, and warning they contained Jewish poison. By May 1940, German soldiers had turned in 34,000 hostile handbills to authorities. By June, that number reached 120,000. By July, 300,000. The Wehrmacht threatened to execute any pilot captured carrying propaganda leaflets. But the numbers revealed something intelligence analysts couldn't ignore. German soldiers were reading them before turning them in. The question was, were they working? The answer came from an unexpected source: captured German mail. British censors intercepted letters from German soldiers to families at home, and the contents were disturbing for Nazi leadership. Obergefreiter Hans Werner wrote to his wife in December 1939, "The British dropped papers saying we would face the same defeat as last time. I showed it to my sergeant, but I kept thinking about it all night." Feldwebel Kurt Hoffmann's letter, intercepted March 1940. "The leaflets say our leaders lied about Poland. I do not believe this, but others in my unit are talking. The leaflets were planting seeds of doubt, but only seeds. Then Germany conquered France, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, Holland. British leaflets seemed futile against Wehrmacht victories. Bomber crews grew more resentful of wasting men and aircraft on bump missions. One pilot wrote, "We are spreading fungus of futility while Germany conquers Europe." British psychological warfare. Executive faced a crisis. Traditional appeals to German conscience achieved nothing measurable. Every leaflet said the same thing. Hitler is bad, war is wrong, Germany will lose, appeal to reason. German soldiers who were winning every battle had no reason to doubt their Führer. The British needed someone who understood how Germans actually thought, not how British intellectuals wished they thought. September 1940, a requisitioned country house in Bedfordshire, England. Dennis Sefton Delmer sat at a desk surrounded by German newspapers, radio transcripts, intercepted letters, trying to solve the unsolvable. Delmer was born in Berlin to Australian parents. He spent his childhood in Germany during World War I. He spoke German without accent. He'd interviewed Hitler in 1931 as Berlin correspondent for the Daily Express. He knew Ernst Röhm, Joseph Goebbels, Heinrich Himmler personally. British intelligence initially suspected Delmer was a Nazi agent because of these connections. It took months to clear him for propaganda work. When he finally received authorization, Delmer told his superiors something they didn't want to hear. Appealing to anti-Nazi sentiment is wasting breath and electric power. There is no anti-Nazi sentiment in Germany. He proposed something radical, psychological warfare that didn't appeal to Germans' better nature, but to their inner pigdog. Instead of saying Hitler is evil, create propaganda that sounded like it came from loyal Nazis, then slip in information that would make Germans doubt, fear, desert. The political warfare executive reluctantly gave him a chance. In May 1941, a new shortwave radio station began broadcasting, Gustav Siegfried Eins. The voice was Der Chef, a fanatical Prussian officer who ranted about how party corruption was betraying Hitler's revolution. Der Chef praised Hitler while attacking Himmler, Goebbels, corrupt party officials. He reported accurate military information mixed with rumors about SS officers sleeping with soldiers' wives while men died on the front. He described Gestapo orgies in graphic detail. He called Churchill that flat-footed son of a drunken Jew to establish credibility. Then he'd mentioned that 47 ships were lost in the Atlantic this week, twice the number German news reported. German author Erich Kästner wrote in his July 1941 diary, "What this station says about Nazi party leaders is mind-blowing." Goebbels himself grudgingly noted in November 1943, "The station does very clever propaganda. From what is broadcast, the English know exactly what they have destroyed and what not." But radio reached only those with shortwave receivers. Delmer needed something that could reach every German soldier on every battlefield. May 1944, Milton Bryan, England. Special Leaflet Squadron Headquarters. Delmer oversaw production of Nachrichten für die Truppe, news for the troops. It looked exactly like an official German military newspaper. Same typeface, same layout, same style as Wehrmacht publications. It reported 80% accurate information culled from intelligent sources. The other 20% was designed to demoralize, create paranoia, encourage desertion. One issue reported that military hospitals were killing wounded soldiers to free up beds. Another described how foreign workers in Germany were sleeping with officers' wives. A third listed casualty figures that were accurate, but German newspapers never published. Each morning, the Special Leaflet Squadron of the US 8th Air Force dropped 250,000 copies over German lines. The psychological genius was this: German soldiers knew it was British propaganda and read it anyway. Why? Because Nachrichten contained accurate military information they couldn't get from German sources. Because it was technically illegal, but soldiers could claim they thought it was a German publication if caught. Because deep down, many wanted permission to surrender, and the paper gave them that permission wrapped in quasi-official format. After D-Day, prisoner interrogations revealed that over 50% of captured German soldiers had read Nachrichten. Many trusted it more than official Nazi newspapers. One captured Obergefreiter told interrogators, "We all knew it was English, but it told us the truth about casualty rates. German papers lied." But leaflets alone couldn't make soldiers surrender. The Psychological Warfare Division needed something more, a tangible artifact, an official-looking document that would transform the abstract idea of surrender into concrete possibility. July 1944. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, London. General Dwight D. Eisenhower signed his name to a document, then watched as his signature was reproduced in facsimile 10 million times per month. The Safe Conduct Pass. It measured 5.25 by 8.5 inches, designed to resemble a college diploma. The front bore Eisenhower's signature, official seals, text in German and English. The German soldier who carries this safe conduct is using it as a sign of his genuine wish to give himself up. He is to be disarmed, to be well looked after, to receive food and medical attention as required, and to be removed from the danger zone as soon as possible. The backlisted provisions of the 1929 Geneva Convention guaranteeing humane treatment. The theory was simple: Germans respect official-looking documents. If surrender looked like following orders rather than betrayal, soldiers might actually do it. The first drops occurred September 1944. Allied bombers scattered them by the millions over German positions. Artillery units fired special projectiles that burst open, releasing thousands of passes over enemy trenches. Fighter bombers dropped them during strafing runs. They landed in foxholes, on roadways, in destroyed buildings where German soldiers sheltered from Allied firepower. The Nazi response revealed the passes were working. They threatened death penalty for possession. But the threats came too late. October 1944, Brest Peninsula, France. American troops advanced on German defensive positions and found something extraordinary. 80% of captured soldiers had safe conduct passes in their pockets. Not just one pass shared among a squad. Individual soldiers carrying their own personal surrender document. Intelligence officers conducting interrogations heard the same story repeatedly. Gefreiter Wolfgang Schmidt, captured October 17th. "I found the pass 2 weeks ago. Every man in my unit had one. We talked about it at night. We agreed. When the Americans break through, we use them." Unteroffizier Ernst Braun. "I hid mine in my boot. My sergeant said anyone caught with one would be shot. But he had one too. I saw it fall out when he removed his coat." Feldwebel Otto Richter. "The pass had Eisenhower's signature. It looked official. More official than our own orders, which changed every day. The psychological effect was profound. Possession created a sense of option, of agency, of potential future. A soldier with a surrender pass had made a tiny psychological concession. I might need this someday." That someday arrived when American artillery obliterated defensive positions, or when tanks broke through, or when supplies ran out. On November 30th, 1944, a captured Hauptmann told interrogators something revealing. "My men called the pass an admission ticket. Some called it a free pass for life. I confiscated 17 of them in 1 week. They kept finding more." But the safe conduct pass alone wasn't enough for soldiers who couldn't speak English. The Psychological Warfare Division identified a crucial problem. German soldiers wanted to surrender but feared being shot while attempting it. They didn't know the English words to communicate their intentions. December 1944, PWD headquarters developed a simple solution. They printed leaflets containing one phrase in German phonetic spelling, A surrender. I surrender. Millions of leaflets and troop newspapers printed this phrase repeatedly. German soldiers could read it, memorize it, practice saying it. The phonetic phrase gained currency in German trenches. Soldiers joked about it, made fun of the pronunciation, discussed it openly. But it stayed in the back of their minds. When the moment came, when American soldiers appeared through the smoke, they remembered. A surrender. The phrase worked because it did something subtle. It made surrender familiar, rehearsed, normalized. By the time a German soldier needed to use it, he'd mentally practiced dozens of times. The switch over to action became effortless. March 1945, the Rhine River. Allied forces crossed into Germany proper, and German resistance collapsed with shocking speed. Between D-Day and March 31st, 1945, 1.3 million German soldiers surrendered on the Western Front. In March alone, 350,000 surrendered. General Eisenhower declared at a press conference, March 27th, "The enemy is a whipped army." The daily surrender rate told the story. March, 10,000 German soldiers per day. First 2 weeks of April, 39,000 per day. Last 16 days of April, 59,000 per day. The Wehrmacht wasn't just losing, it was disintegrating. April 1st, 1945, Ruhr Pocket, Germany. Field Marshal Walter Model commanded 370,000 German troops encircled by Allied forces. Among those troops, 14 divisions of Army Group B, remnants of 19 divisions total, millions of civilians trapped in bombed cities. Only 20%, 75,000 soldiers, had infantry weapons. Another 75,000 had pistols only. Ammunition and fuel supplies were nearly exhausted. Model's requests for airlift were dismissed by Hitler. Allied air supremacy made resupply impossible. Hitler ordered Fortress Ruhr to hold out for months, tying down Allied divisions. Model knew this was fantasy. His soldiers were deserting in massive numbers, walking toward American lines waving leaflets and white flags. On April 7th, Model's Chief of Staff Karl Wagner urged him to capitulate to save German lives. Model refused. He couldn't reconcile surrender with everything he'd demanded from his men throughout the war. Instead, he issued extraordinary orders. April 15th, Model dissolved Army Group B. He discharged all youths and older men from service. Non-combatant troops were authorized to surrender on April 17th, when ammunition ran out. Combat troops were given implicit permission to surrender. Model called it dropping weapons and going home. Between April 1st and April 18th, 317,000 German soldiers from the Ruhr Pocket surrendered. Many carried safe conduct passes. Many had memorized I surrender. Many had read Nachrichten für die Truppe and knew the war was lost. On April 21st, Model walked into a forest near Duisburg and shot himself. He chose death rather than surrender, but he'd given his men permission to choose life. The pattern repeated across Germany. April 5th, 1945, Hermann Furch surrendered all forces in Bavaria. Thousands of troops walked into American lines carrying leaflets. April 18th, Düsseldorf fell without significant fighting. German anti-Nazi resistance had tried to surrender the city, but even after SS crushed the resistance, regular Wehrmacht troops refused to defend it. April 30th, Hitler committed suicide in Berlin. May 4th, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery accepted surrender of all German forces in northwest Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. 1 million men laid down weapons. Throughout this collapse, American and British intelligence officers interviewed prisoners. The testimonies revealed the psychological impact of 6 years of leaflet warfare. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, captured May said, "I kept a safe conduct pass for 4 months. I showed no one. When the Americans surrounded our position, I took it out. 12 others had them too. We walked to their lines together. Feldwebel Karl Richter. Nachrichten told us the Americans were professional soldiers, not monsters. When I saw them, I remembered this. I surrendered. Gefreiter Josef Schmidt. The leaflet said we would receive food and medical care. I was wounded, starving. I believed them because they had been accurate about military defeats. I was right to believe. According to Noel Monks of the London Daily Mail, 75% of German prisoners, 11,302 out of 15,000 surveyed, who possessed safe conduct passes actually surrendered because of them. The passes weren't just propaganda, they were psychological architecture, giving soldiers permission to choose survival over fanaticism. But what about those who didn't surrender? The comparison between Western and Eastern fronts revealed the propaganda's true effectiveness. Eastern Front, January-April 1945, 800,000 German soldiers surrendered to Soviet forces. Western Front, same period, 1.8 million surrendered to American and British forces. The reason? German soldiers facing the Red Army fought to the death, knowing Soviet captivity meant almost certain death in Siberian camps. German soldiers facing Western allies surrendered readily, convinced by propaganda that they would receive humane treatment under Geneva Convention. The mathematics were brutal but clear. Eastern Front, Germans killed and wounded far exceeded Soviet casualties in final months. Germans fought with suicidal desperation. Western Front, German casualties were minimal compared to surrender numbers. Most troops chose leaflets over combat. Field reports from spring 1945 documented this again and again. American divisions advancing through Germany reported German units disappearing overnight. Soldiers deserted en masse, leaving equipment behind, walking west with surrender passes. British units found entire defensive positions abandoned. Foxholes littered with discarded weapons and safe conduct passes carefully preserved. The Wehrmacht hadn't been defeated on the Western Front. It had been psychologically dismantled, piece by piece, leaflet by leaflet. The numbers told a story of unprecedented psychological warfare success. From D-Day to the end of April 1945, 2.8 million German soldiers surrendered on the Western Front. Total Allied divisions that captured them, 88 divisions at peak strength. That's an average of 31,818 prisoners per Allied division. Impossible through military force alone. Safe conduct passes dropped, over 10 million per month, from July 1944 to May 1945. Total passes distributed, approximately 100 million. Nachrichten für die Truppe daily distribution, 250,000 copies per day for 11 months. Total copies, over 80 million. Radio broadcasts from Soldatensender Calais, daily from 1943 to 1945. Estimated German soldier listeners, 40% of Wehrmacht troops in Western Europe. The most telling statistic came from post-war analysis. Western allies suffered approximately 195,000 dead and missing from D-Day to VE Day. German casualties in same period, estimated equal or slightly higher in killed and wounded. But German POWs taken, 2.8 million. The ratio revealed everything. For every German killed fighting, 14 surrendered. Compare this to the Eastern Front, where Germans inflicted far higher casualties before surrendering in much smaller numbers. The difference: psychological warfare didn't exist on the Eastern Front in the same sophisticated form. Joseph Goebbels, the master of Nazi propaganda, recognized defeat in his propaganda war. April 1945, 1 month before his suicide, Goebbels wrote in his diary, "Enemy propaganda is beginning to have uncomfortably noticeable effect on the German people. Anglo-American leaflets are now no longer carelessly thrown aside, but are read attentively. British broadcasts have a grateful audience." This admission from the man who'd controlled German information for 12 years meant everything. the propaganda minister who'd convinced Germans they were the master race, who'd orchestrated the most sophisticated manipulation of public opinion in modern history, admitted the British had won the information war. His admission came too late. The Wehrmacht was already dissolved, German soldiers flooding into POW camps, clutching safe conduct passes and memorized English phrases. But the most revealing testimonies came years later, when historians interviewed survivors. Former Obergefreiter Wolfgang Schneider interviewed 1978. The safe conduct pass gave us something the Wehrmacht never did, a choice. We could die for a lost cause or live for Germany's future. The pass made surrender feel like duty rather than cowardice. Former Feldwebel Ernst Hoffmann interviewed 1982. Every soldier knew the war was lost by March 1945. German radio lied about defeats. Nachrichten told the truth. When you have nothing but lies from your leaders and truth from your enemies, you begin to question which side you're really on. Former Hauptmann Otto Richter interviewed 1989. I was Wehrmacht, not SS. I never believed in Nazi ideology completely. The leaflets didn't convert me. They gave me permission to act on doubts I already had. That permission saved my life and the lives of 200 men under my command who surrendered with me. These testimonies revealed something crucial about how propaganda actually works. It doesn't change minds through argument. It provides tools for people to act on changes already occurring. The safe conduct pass didn't convince German soldiers the Reich would lose. Battlefield defeats did that. It provided a mechanism, a ritual, a script for transforming internal doubt into external action. Nachrichten didn't make Germans doubt Nazi leadership. Corruption, incompetence, and military disasters did that. It provided alternative information that validated what soldiers already suspected. The radio broadcasts didn't turn Germans against Hitler. His strategic blunders did that. They provided cover, plausible deniability, a way to access truth while maintaining the fiction of loyalty if caught. The contrast with traditional British propaganda revealed why Delma's approach succeeded. Early leaflets said, "Hitler is evil, the war is wrong. You should oppose your government." This failed because it asked German soldiers to betray everything they'd been raised to believe, to admit their entire world view was wrong, to become enemies of their nation. Delma's propaganda said, "The party leadership has betrayed Hitler's revolution. Himmler is corrupt. Your officers are lying about casualties. You can surrender honorably under Geneva Convention." This worked because it asked soldiers only to acknowledge specific facts, to recognize immediate self-interest, to preserve themselves for Germany's future. One demanded ideological conversion, impossible under pressure. The other offered practical escape, immediately actionable. The legacy of Britain's leaflet campaign extended far beyond World War II. The techniques developed by Delma and the psychological warfare executive became doctrine for Cold War operations. The CIA studied British methods for decades, applying them in Korea, Vietnam, and throughout proxy conflicts. The safe conduct pass model was replicated. American forces dropped millions during the Korean War, Persian Gulf War, Afghanistan, Iraq. The principle remained constant: give enemy soldiers a tangible artifact that transforms abstract surrender into concrete procedure. The radio broadcast strategy evolved into Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Voice of America, stations that mixed accurate information with subtle subversion, giving audiences in authoritarian states access to truth wrapped in plausible deniability. The newspaper tactic became the template for psychological operations worldwide. Create publications that look indigenous but contain information designed to demoralize, divide, and encourage defection. Modern military doctrine treats psychological warfare as equal to kinetic operations, not supplementary, but essential. Every major military operation since World War II has included massive leaflet drops, radio broadcasts, and surrender incentive programs. The principle Delmer discovered in 1940 remained valid 80 years later. Paper can be as powerful as bullets if it gives people permission to act on what they already believe. But there was one final testament to the leaflet campaign's effectiveness: the German response. Nazi authorities knew the propaganda was working because they devoted enormous resources to counteracting it. The Wehrmacht established special units to collect and destroy leaflets before soldiers found them. The Gestapo executed civilians caught distributing Allied materials. German radio broadcast programs warning soldiers that surrender passes were traps. Allied forces would torture prisoners despite Geneva Convention promises. Nazi newspapers ran articles claiming the Allies were forging Wehrmacht communications to create confusion. The penalty for listening to enemy radio broadcasts: execution. The penalty for keeping enemy leaflets: concentration camp or death. Yet soldiers kept listening, kept reading, kept hiding safe conduct passes in their boots and pockets. A February 1945 Wehrmacht directive revealed desperation. The collection and destruction of enemy propaganda leaflets is to be treated with the same urgency as removing live explosives from defensive positions. The directive compared leaflets to bombs. Both could destroy military units just through different mechanisms. By March 1945, the Wehrmacht stopped trying to prevent soldiers from reading propaganda. There were too many leaflets, too many deserters, too few military police. The psychological warfare campaign had overwhelmed German counter-propaganda capabilities entirely. The final irony came in May 1945, when Allied forces discovered massive stockpiles of their own propaganda in captured German headquarters. Wehrmacht intelligence had been collecting, analyzing, and cataloguing every leaflet, every broadcast transcript, every prisoner interrogation that mentioned propaganda. They'd built elaborate systems to track which messages worked, which failed, which units were most susceptible to psychological warfare. The files revealed that German military intelligence understood exactly how effective Allied propaganda was, and had no solution. One intelligence assessment from March 1945 stated, "Enemy leaflet operations have achieved strategic effect equivalent to loss of 3 divisions. No countermeasures have proven effective. Soldiers believe enemy broadcasts more than official communiques. Recommend immediate cessation of false casualty reporting to restore credibility." But this recommendation will not be implemented. The Wehrmacht knew their own propaganda had destroyed their credibility, and knew they couldn't restore it because admitting the truth would cause immediate collapse. They were trapped in a lie that Allied psychological warfare exploited relentlessly. September 1945. Dennis Sefton Delmer returned to civilian journalism. The political warfare executive officially never existed. Its operations remained classified for decades. Delmer's superior, Robert Walmsley, wrote in a top-secret internal history, "Black propaganda was the one theatre of operations during the war at which we British surpassed all others." Sefton Delmer was truly a genius of his art. But Delmer himself gave strict instructions to his team: never publicize what we did. He feared that unrepentant Nazis would claim, as they had after World War I, that Germany was defeated by unconscionable psychological methods rather than on the battlefield. He didn't want to give them that excuse. So the most successful propaganda campaign in military history remained secret for 30 years. When Delmer finally published his memoirs in 1962, the world learned what really happened behind the scenes of the information war. The British hadn't won through superior ideology or moral arguments. They'd won by understanding human psychology better than the Nazis did, by recognizing that soldiers don't need to be convinced their cause is evil, they just need permission to choose survival. The British leaflet campaign revealed something fundamental about psychological warfare that remains true today. Information doesn't change behavior by convincing people they're wrong. It changes behavior by giving people tools to act on doubts they already have. The Safe Conduct Pass didn't convert 2.8 million German soldiers from Nazis to Democrats. It gave 2.8 million exhausted, hungry, terrified men a script for self-preservation that looked like duty. That distinction meant the difference between fighting to the death and walking into captivity. That distinction saved hundreds of thousands of Allied lives who would have died in combat against fanatics with no option but death. That distinction shortened the war by months, perhaps years, accelerating Germany's collapse on the Western Front while Soviet forces ground forward in the East. The mathematics of psychological warfare proved decisive. 100 million pieces of paper, costing pennies each to produce and distribute, eliminated the need to kill 2.8 million enemy soldiers in combat. Cost per surrender, approximately $3.50 in 1945 dollars. Cost per enemy killed in combat, approximately $50,000. The return on investment was $14,000 to 1. No weapon system in history matched that efficiency. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Wehrmacht that had conquered Europe in 1940 no longer existed. On the Western Front, it hadn't been defeated in conventional battle. It had been psychologically dismantled by pieces of paper that gave soldiers permission to choose life over death. Former Gefreiter Hans Müller, who'd surrendered with a safe conduct pass in his pocket, wrote in his diary, "The British understood something our leaders never did. They understood that German soldiers were still human beings who wanted to live. The Nazis treated us as expendable resources. The British treated us as men making rational choices. That's why we chose them." The leaflets had never expected to convince German soldiers their cause was wrong. They'd only needed to convince them there was a path to survival. That was enough. More than enough. 2.8 million surrenders proved it. Surrenders proved it. Surrenders proved it. Surrenders proved it. Surrenders proved it.